Now, there appears to be a pause in hostilities between Israeli forces and Palestinian militants in the Gaza Strip. Reports say that a ceasefire has been agreed. 4 Israelis and more than 20 Palestinians have been killed since the violence erupted on Friday. Earlier, President Trump tweeted that he supports Israel 100% in its defence of its citizens. Let's speak to our correspondent Yolande Knell, who's in Jerusalem for us now. Tell us what you know about these reports of a ceasefire, Yolande.
Well, for the moment at least, things remain quiet in Gaza and in southern Israel. The violence really petered out a few hours ago. This after Palestinian officials and a TV station run by Hamas, which controls Gaza, had said that Egypt, with help from the United Nations, had managed to broker some kind of a truce. We've not had any confirmation of that from the Israeli side, but that is often the case. Usually the policy is that quiet will be met with quiet. But the Israeli military has now lifted the restrictions it imposed during the past couple of days of really intense fighting on the residents of southern Israel. So that is a sign that really there are hopes that life could be getting back to normal. But this really was the most serious flare-up in terms of how deadly it was, how intense it was, that there has been between Israeli forces and Palestinian militants in Gaza since 2014. That's the last time when there was a full-scale armed conflict.
And why do you think this particular escalation happened now?
I mean, we can trace it back to Friday after the regular Friday protests when a Palestinian sniper shot across the boundary fence and shot and injured 2 Israeli soldiers. The Israeli military quickly responded to that, targeting militant posts in Gaza, and then the rocket fire started. Things did escalate very quickly. We saw the Israeli Prime Minister at one time ordering what he called massive strikes on Gaza, deploying extra tanks, extra troops to southern Israel. A lot of fiery messages coming out from Palestinian militant groups from both Hamas and Islamic Jihad threatening Israel. And then, I mean, the Palestinian militant groups appear to have been calculating that this is a time that they could try to exact concessions from Israel. They claim that there have been delays in implementing a previous ceasefire deal brokered by Egypt that was back at the end of March, just ahead of the Israeli general election. In particular, their complaint is that there's been a delay in the transfer of Qatari aid money, millions of dollars that are supposed to be transferred into Gaza, and also easing some of the border restrictions on the Gaza Strip. They seem to have thought this was a good time to press ahead with some kind of an escalation, because this is a week in which Israel marks 2 national holidays. It's Memorial Day and Independence Day. And we're just a short time ahead from the Eurovision Song Contest being hosted in Israel. On the Palestinian side, the economic crisis is really being felt very sorely right now as Palestinian Muslims begin to mark the Islamic holy month of Ramadan.
OK, thank you. Yolande Knell for us there in Jerusalem.
Well, the skies over the Gaza-Israeli border are quiet as Islamic Jihad, a militant group in Gaza, says a ceasefire with Israel has been restored.
Israel has lifted restrictions on civilians living near the Gaza border, that indicating it accepts the truce. It ends a weekend of deadly violence and the worst round of hostilities there in years.
Oren Lieberman is near the Israel-Gaza border. He joins us now live. Oren, good to see you again. Let's talk about this ceasefire that apparently has been restored between Israel and Gaza. What more are you able to tell us about that?
It went into effect at 4:30 in the morning, so overnight between Sunday and Monday, according to a spokesman for Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Israel rarely, if ever, comments or confirms these ceasefires. But the indication from the Israeli military was that this had, in fact, gone into effect because at 7 o'clock, all of the restrictions on civilian activities and civilian living around the Gaza Strip in the Gaza periphery had been lifted. And that is a clear indication that Israel and the military expected to be a relatively calm and quiet day along Gaza. Again, an indication that there is, in fact, a ceasefire. We were in Ashkelon, a city just north of Gaza, overnight. There was some firing, but it came just after midnight. Since then, we haven't really heard anything. Yes, we hear a drone overhead now and again. We've heard a fighter jet overhead, but none of the firing, none of the hostilities, none of the strikes, none of the rockets that we've seen here over the course of the past 48 hours. It was, as you pointed out, the worst weekend, the most violent weekend of fighting since the end of the 2014 war, beginning with a sharp escalation on Saturday morning and going all the way until Sunday night. By the end of that fighting, Israel says militants had fired more than 600 rockets from Gaza into Israel, killing 4 people in Israel. The Israeli military had carried out a wave of airstrikes across targets, more than 300 targets, in fact, across Gaza. According to the Palestinian Ministry of Health, 23 Gazans were killed in this round of fighting before that ceasefire went into effect. Rosemary and George, there were intense efforts from the very beginning by Egypt and the United Nations to try to restore that ceasefire. Those didn't bear any fruit until overnight from Sunday into Monday. As you can see behind us here, it is a quiet horizon behind me in Gaza for the first time in what feels like a very long time here.
Yeah, indeed, and that is very important. But what more are you learning about the circumstances leading up to this latest violence? We're talking about 600 rockets being fired from Gaza, airstrikes from Israel. Talk to us about what you know on that.
So it's important to note that this round of fighting comes after what had been a week, or rather a month of relative calm here between Israel and Gaza, ever since before the Israeli elections even. And that was all up until Friday. There were usual weekly Gaza protests along the border fence, and those have been standard over the course of the last year. But during that, the Israeli military says a sniper inside Gaza wounded 2 soldiers along the southern Gaza border. Israel responded with a strike that killed 2 Hamas militants in a military post. Hamas and other militant factions vowed to respond on Friday. That response came and began, at least on Saturday morning, with a quick barrage of more than 50 rockets within an hour. And that escalated into the fighting we saw. And it did very much escalate in stages, from short-term rockets coming out of Gaza to medium-range rockets, and then even an anti-tank missile that was fired at a civilian vehicle. In terms of the Israeli strikes, those too escalated in stages. First, smaller posts along the border that were hit, then a multi-story building that Israel says was terror infrastructure. And then after that, a targeted killing of a Gaza official, the first in years that Israel has carried out. It is that evolution in stages that allows both sides to understand sort of the rules of the game and how these progress. It is also that evolution, and because these two sides know each other so well, that mediators are able to step in before it reaches the next stage and the next escalation.
Yeah, that's a good point. Oren Lieberman bringing us the latest from the Israeli-Gaza border, where it is nearly 10:30 in the morning. Appreciate your update.